This is the Cultural Fluency podcast with Angel Pretot, the French coach. That's me. And today in episode number 18, I am with Wayne Jones, who is a writer, editor, and podcaster from Ottawa, Canada. So Wayne, thank you for joining me. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. That pretty much summarizes it. I'm a former academic librarian, and I'm retired from that now for about 3 years. And in those 3 years, though, I have a free time, or I have a schedule that I have total control over, and those are my three main activities. I'm publishing a book and writing another book. I'm doing freelance editing, and I have a podcast, which I really, really enjoy, that I've been doing for about 1.5 years now, on the topic of writing and editing. And that's where I met Angel.
Yes. So I was on your podcast, and now you're on this one. You have written at least 8 books. Did I get that right? 6 novels and 2 nonfiction books.
That's right. I've written, not all of them were published, because not all of them would I want to be published. And in fact, I'm actually going through, I had, just as a single example, I had actually published 2 novels. And I did this little project on Substack where I went through and I was actually reading aloud as episodes on Substack the contents of one of the novel. And I really discovered that I don't want this out in public. I was very unpleased with the writing. So I'm in the process of unpublishing that book. But the book that I have published, the novel that I'm actually still very happy with, is a kind of parody of a mystery novel called The Killing Type. So that I'm happy with. And the other 2 books that I published that I'm happy with are, I co-wrote a biography of if you know anything about stand-up comedy, you'll recognize this name, but the person's name is Greg Giraldo. And I published that co-wrote about 4 years ago. And the other book that I wrote was about 10 years ago. And it's called Less and Less. And it's about what I call personal minimalism. And what I'm discussing in there is not so much, how do you make your house clutter-free, but what are the implications for your character if you're the type of person who is a minimalist? So the psychology of minimalism. And I'm happy to say that I'm happy with that book as well. So what I'm doing in my old age, as I approach the cliff of death, is to make sure that what's out there are books that I'm pleased to have associated with me, and to take down the ones that I don't like so much anymore.
Right. So you're even now editing down, being minimalistic about the number of books that you want to have out with your name on them. That makes sense.
That's well observed.
Can you tell us a bit more about personal minimalism, like what that consists in, and what would be the reasons why someone would want to do this, and the benefits from it?
Yeah, I mean, in a certain way, it was spurred by, again, like I say, I first wrote it 10 years ago. It was spurred by my helping my mother, who is definitely not a minimalist, move from one house to another. And she's not a hoarder like that, but she's a gatherer and a collector. And we had to move her to a smaller place. So I gathered some lessons from there about why people hang on to things, and sometimes things that they never ever use. Right. And I've talked to many people about this topic, and a lot of people tell me about that. I've had people tell me, for example, that they moved from one house to another, and when they moved to the second house, they still have boxes in their basement that they never ever opened for the 5 years they were in their first house. So that was kind of the impetus for it. But what I started to examine was to try to look at my character and figure out, frankly, do I handle people in the same way? So that I try to whittle down the number of people who are in my life. And if I'm dissatisfied with them, or if they don't fit, then I, so to speak, get rid of them. Not in the mafia way, but I,
You also wrote the kilo type, so
as far as I'm going to tell you anyway. But
I see.
no, but and so that's what I was doing. I was looking, it's a memoir, basically, in a sense. And I was looking at my own character and trying as best one can, especially when you're writing about something that's self-critical, basically.
Right.
It's because it's a trait that has good things about it, but it's a trait that has some not so good things about it. You know, you shouldn't be well, necessarily dropping people out of your life like that, especially with little reason. And so that's what I was trying to examine. What effect does my tendency to minimalism? You can probably see behind me. I have a very spared living room.
Right.
What does that tendency? How does that tendency extrapolate to the way I act in my personal life with people? That
Right.
was what I was interested in. And I
That
have to
is
say, I'm still pleased with the book. I think I can fairly say that I wasn't dishonest with myself. I criticized myself in it and pointed out the good and the bad. I tried the best I could. It was a real challenge to do, but fascinating. I've always been interested in minimalism and hoarding and those topics.
right. That is a fascinating topic. So we can see you have experience in writing both fiction and nonfiction. And on top of that, you actually help other people edit and publish their books, right? That is one
Yes.
of your current professions. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, I'm a classic freelance editor. I'm in a little bit of a different situation in the sense that I'm retired, so I have, for example, pension income. I don't
Right.
need to rely. I don't need to make a living at this, but I really enjoy it. But of course, there is a little bit of extra income that comes from it. But mostly, I've been helping people with nonfiction books of all kinds of subjects. You know, someone has written a book about finance and it's 50,000 words long and they need an editor, and I work with them. Or I've helped several people with novels that they've written, and I've edited those. And then in addition to that, I also work with an academic publisher that is a publisher of academic journals, and I do proofreading and copy editing for them. So there you're reading very esoteric, often subject matter. And it points out one thing about editing is that the important thing about editing is not so much that I be an expert in, let's say, philosophy, but that I be an expert in editing.
Right.
And a lot of it's important for anyone who wants to get anything edited to know that you don't need an expert in philosophy to edit your new philosophy book. You need an expert in editing,
Right.
because everything can be looked up. So
Yes, it's not unlike my situation as a coach where I cannot be an expert in everything that the client has to speak about in French, but it's okay that I'm an expert in French and the rest I can look up. So I can totally relate to that.
definitely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So you have experience with like the entirety of the book creation process. I know I have lots of people that are listening to this podcast that are in my audience who want to write a book, their own book, but they don't really know where to start or they don't know how to go about it. Could you like really quickly in this podcast give us a bit of like the how to start when you want to write a book?
I would say two things. One is that first, the publishing industry has changed a lot now. And there are actually a lot of people out there they style themselves in different ways as coaches or developmental editors or whatever, whom you can pay to help you get going. Some of them might even put you on a schedule and all those sorts of things. The other way, and this, I know this will sound very old-fashioned, but this is the way I wrote and was able to stick to it, is that, and it'll sound like it's no advice at all, but you really just have to commit to the idea. Just like, for example, if you say, you know what, I'm going to start training for a marathon, and that means I'm going to have to run some kilometers every day, same sort of thing. So when I was writing, for example, I found it was very useful. You know, if you think about, for example, for a regular sized novel, you have to write 60,000 words to get that done.
Right.
That's daunting to start with, right? But if you write 300 words a day in 200 in am I doing the math right? In 200 days, you'll have the book finished, and to
Right.
stick to it. I don't want to say religiously because I'm an atheist, but secularly, religiously, if you can do that, you can do it. So, I mean, that's basically what I did. It takes a kind of commitment, and that's why I say, but you really have to stay with it. And because I rarely missed a day, rarely. I had some times where I went to bed and said, I just can't write 200 words or whatever now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got out of bed and wrote those 200 words before. And they don't have to be high quality words. They don't have to be what you know is the final product, but you have to do it. And eventually the practice builds itself into yourself. And that's what I did. And as a really, in a way, what can I say, simplistic way
Mm-hmm.
to get it done, but you can write a book that way. Yeah. Don't worry so much about what you're let's say you're on a 200 word per day schedule. Don't worry so much about what you put on the page. Oh my God, I would want to see that in print. But you've got 200 words down. That's something. That's 200 more than zero. And go with it. And then you have 400 more than zero. And
Right.
that's how I did it. And I wrote 5, 6, 7 books like that. Definitely. Yeah.
So basically you worry over the quantity, not over the quality in this first step.
That's exactly right. So you get it down. And actually, I'm the kind of writer who does the quantity and the quality at the same time, but you don't have to be like that. But any book you write is going to require, okay, let's say you get to the end of those 300 days, say you've got a 60,000 words of writing. That's just the start, right? You're
Right.
about 20% finished then. Then you have to go through it and cut and add and edit and whatever. And just work through it. I sometimes think of it as a sort of if you have a towel with a lot of water in it,
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep wringing that thing in order to bring it down to something that's very dry and proper. And that's what you have to do. So yeah, create your first draft, and if you've got that, you've gotten a lot farther than 75%
Most
of
people,
people.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
What about planning? Would you recommend making a plan before writing?
Like it depends. I've done both, where I simply start and have at it and write as I go, kind of thing. But I've certainly had others where I've structured the book, come up with an overall structure, and that can be very helpful because, for example, the book that I'm actually in the process of publishing, I started off with a structure for that. And
Right.
it can be very helpful because it's a nonfiction book. Another advantage to that is that I can write anywhere in there. So it's a biography. So if I get tired of writing about how the person was born, I can skip to his death and start writing about that. Or if I
Right.
get tired about writing how he wrote a lot of essays, I can skip to the part where he compiled an edition of Shakespeare, that sort of thing, and eventually you'll get all the parts right. So yes, so the short answer is either way, whatever works for the individual. But I would say in general, a structure is usually a very helpful thing.
Right. Right. Otherwise, you have to learn right from the beginning to the end with
Yeah.
not really any idea where you're going. I guess you need to have a general idea, at least, even if it's a novel, whether it's a novel or a nonfiction. You still need to know where you're going, right?
Yeah, and part of it depends on what someone's personality and disposition are. But I think a structure can also help ease a little of the fear of writing. You know, if you have 60,000 words divided into 12 sections, you can say, well, what's the math on that? 5,000 words, I can write 5,000 words for a section and do that. So a lot of it are these sort of mind games that you play with yourself to say, yeah, I can do that. Because if you think of 60,000 words, I remember when I was very young, in my teens, and I just could not fathom how someone could write that many words, 60,000, 75,000 words. I just could not imagine how that can be done. And now I not only can imagine it, but I've done that several times.
Right.
So you just, it's like a mind trick. And I don't have to play the trick on myself so much now, because I know that it's possible.
Yeah, I think I have the opposite problem. Perhaps it's because I did write some novels when I was young. So I'm not thinking of like the mass of words. It's more like I'm not afraid that I can't write the amount of word. I'm afraid that I'm going to write a very long ramble, and that all of that will have to be edited away and started from scratch.
Right.
So I guess it's the opposite issue. But I can see why you would want to first have a first draft anyway, and edit it from there. And speaking of books in general, I remember a quote, I don't remember where it's from, but the quote was, a writer is not someone who wants to write, it's actually someone who wants to be read.
Right.
And another issue that I find a lot of people who want to write is that they don't really have an audience for what they want to write. And I feel like it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. Like, how do you get started building an audience if you don't have your writing first? Is that something you deal with your clients, or would you care? Is it something people should care about, or not at all?
It's a tricky situation. I mean, generally speaking, I never think about the audience or the readership, because the danger there is that you're tailoring it to something that is not really what you feel, or not really what your aesthetic is, or not really the way you want the story to go. And especially that applies to fiction. If you're writing fiction, you have to just, fiction is a tricky thing. You have to express yourself about the topic, no matter how personal or violent or embarrassing or whatever it might be, in the way that you think is the best, without thinking, oh my God, my mother may read this, or my friends at work may see this and something will be exposed about me. If you do that, you'll be self-censoring all the time, and you'll probably end up with a very mediocre milk toast, as they say, novel.
Milk toast? I've never heard that. Do you mind explaining it for the non-native English speakers?
It's weird because it has, I should look, I don't know the etymology off the top of my head, but it's spelled in English, Milque, as if, sort of sounds like it might be from French. And then it's toast, but usually what it means is something very bland, milk toast. I don't know the etymology of that. I'll look it up later.
But a very bland book, basically.
Bland, yeah, right. And for me, there's nothing worse than bland fiction. I can't read it. I can read 5 pages and then sorry. And a similar thing would apply to nonfiction, although it's less of it's not so much exposing yourself in a certain, or not necessarily, although there is something, a big genre that's very popular these days is memoir. So a lot of people are writing memoir, which should be nonfiction. And so you are exposing things about yourself. The short answer to your question is, think more about what you want to write and how you want to express yourself, and don't think so much about the reader in the end. Then again, the caveat I would put there is that all the writing that I've done, I've never done it to make money. And fortunately, I haven't made much money from it, but I've said exactly what I wanted to say, and I'm happy with that.
Right. So you wouldn't recommend to think of the reader, rather think of what you want to say and think of you as a writer and what you want to express. Not some, if someone reads it, great. If no one reads it, it's all right.
That's
That'd be
right.
your perspective.
And then the other thing is that you'd be surprised. Some people may think like you, and some people may be quite fascinated by your take on certain things, either fictional or non-fictional. So don't think that just because it's super personal that it must be of interest to you only. You'd be
Right.
surprised. Yeah. So, but yeah, you can't second guess and you can't cater. I mean, that's where for example, the publishing factories come from, or they let's say there's a publisher that publishes romance novels. Those are done to a formula
Right.
that's aimed at a certain readership, and they just crank those out, or have writers cranking those out, and those are giant financial successes. But if you have, and I've always wanted my writing to be what I would call literary, and by that I don't mean that I'm any Vladimir Nabokov or anything like that. But what I mean is that I want the writing to be solid and good and without cliches and stark. And I don't want to be writing to any formula, and although the formulas will make money, but as I say, that's not my purpose.
Right. That makes sense. So I can understand why a publishing house would seek to publish the books that are going to get sold, and a writer who's focused on expressing themselves would not care about that so much. So would you recommend that that writer tries to self-publish their book rather than seek to go with a publishing house? How would you go about that?
It likely will be that I mean the proportion of people who find either a literary agent or a publisher who's willing to take them on is very, very small. I don't know what the stats are, but you're talking about less than 5%, maybe something like that.
Yes,
so it's very
small, very small percentage.
Even smaller, yeah, right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So there used to be a day when I was writing, and when I was writing or started writing back in the 90s, back in the in those times, that your choice was either I find an agent and ultimately a publisher, or this is a novel that will never get published.
Right, because at the time you couldn't just go ahead and publish yourself. It was just, you didn't have numeric press and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now you have the option. Now, again, it's going to cost you some money. But for example, I'm paying an agency to, and they're going to, I've seen what they've done so far. They're going to do an exquisite job with it to publish my book. But what you hope is that, what you know is that you will get exactly what you want. There's no one telling you you have to take this part out or this part out. You have full control of the content.
Yes.
And what you're hoping is that it will be well enough written that some people may get copies. So if we're just talking about money, you will get some of that money back.
Right.
And so, yeah, but it's an awesome thing. And self-publishing, or as it's a lot of people now call it indie publishing. Mm-hmm. Indie publishing is becoming very, very popular now just because of this. And the other thing about literary agents and what is now called legacy publishing, which is standard publishing, is it often took a long time to find an agent. You're talking about years.
Years, yes.
Yeah, I just finished this book. I worked on this book for many years. I just finished it kind of in an early draft earlier this year. I finished it in a final draft just, I don't know, a month ago, and now it's in the process of being published. I'm not going to wait around, and I know by the subject matter, I'd be dead before it would ever be published. It would never get published.
Right.
And I'm not saying I think the writing is good. I think the topic is interesting, but that's just the way the business works.
Yes. So so far you're speaking about self-publishing, which means basically you'll find someone to print them and you'll have printed copy, and then you'll seek to distribute those copies.
Yeah, there are various agencies out there. You mentioned, like I was saying, they call themselves different things. Often they're called indie publishing agencies or self-publishing agencies. Some of them call them hybrid publishers. And I would warn the prospective writer out there, there's a whole range of them, ranging from, for example, the firm that I'm using, which is highly reputable and doing exactly what I want. And they're taking care of everything from distribution to the whole
Can I ask
thing.
what firm that is in case someone wants to use them?
Sure. They're called authorimprints.com, based in, I think they're based in California. And I've also, just from various, when I used to be on Twitter, I think it was, or X as it's now called, there are scams out there as well. So there are people who have no idea or no intention of helping you with your book. They will take your book, maybe do a word check on it, slap some sort of cover on it, and you'll end up with a terrible, terrible product that you pay $1,500 for. And so, and there are other also outright scams. People will take your money and you'll never see anything out of it. Be very, very careful about what you choose. Be extremely careful.
What would be the telltale signs of such a scam, for people to watch out?
One of the signs, and I had this experience because it's funny because I just happened to be just finished writing an article about this. One of the signs is that when you start to ask them detailed questions about things, you start to get answers that are not all that satisfying. There's certain things they won't say or whatever, and you go, well, I'm a client of yours, or I want to be. That's one of the signs. And
so
the other one,
probe more, ask more questions.
Yes, right, exactly. There will be a contract to be signed. I would definitely not just say, oh, well, I'm getting my book published, I'll just sign right here. No. I would get that examined and make sure that everything is there. And the other way is that at least what I'm familiar with are the ones that are just outright scams. I think I had one where I just started asking him a few questions, I think it was through Twitter, and he got extremely defensive about what I was asking. And then he pretended that there was a seminar coming up in half an hour that I could attend, and that I'm pretty sure it was a fake seminar. There were slides that he presented, but he pretended as if there were other people attending. He was doing this thing like, hey, Ralph from Vancouver, good to see you. But I'm pretty sure I was the only one attending that. So he's putting on a whole show about the whole thing. So there's some things like that are just dirty scams to the core. And there's lots in the middle too. Ones where they will do some job for you. But for example, with the firm I'm using, they do an original cover. They don't just take a template and put your name in it, and it kind of looks very cheapish kind of thing. Ironically, my book started with them working on the cover and getting me to approve it, and I've ended up with just a gorgeous cover for the book, totally original, nothing template about it. And others will have just templates that they kind of just crank out, or they use imagery that they have access to in a database and that sort of thing, and they look cheap. So I guess all I would say is that I don't pretend to know everything about the whole range between scam and great, but you should be aware of that. Don't facilely just choose one because it looks okay. So
you need to shop around a little bit and probe and make sure you have great quality.
Yeah. And there's also, by the way, a website called, I think it's called Writer Beware.
Okay.
And it's run by I think it's run by the Science Fiction Writers of America, but it's not only about sci-fi. They investigate publishers who may be running some sort of scam, and they out them on this
Mm.
site. So that's somewhere where a writer could go to see if you see your publisher listed there. I wouldn't use them.
Right. So writers beware. That's where you go try to like double check that at least your company that you have found and that you think is great is not listed there.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
All right. And so all of these will actually print some copies of your book, right? I mean, at least that's the goal, eventually, right? So what would be your take on ebooks, online publishing, maybe print on demand? Do you have any experience with that? Would you recommend it to people, or would you avoid it?
Oh no, I mean, I think and just for and some, I don't know again what some of the middle ones do, but the one that I'm using, the great thing about it is that all they're doing is providing a publishing service for me. They will
Right.
set it up so that it'll be available in all the markets, and they take none of my royalties. Whatever I get for royalties, what I'm paying them for is simply to.
So you're paying a lump sum upfront for them to do the work, and then you will receive all of the royalties.
That's right. And part of
Right.
that is that an audio version will be produced.
Mm-hmm.
An ebook version will be produced, and a print version will be produced. And I would say to any writer out there that though you shouldn't just do the ebook version. You really should have those three versions. Those are the basics. It's very much expected now. And the other thing is that you're taking advantage, or not taking advantage of, availing yourself of the tendency now. A lot of people do their reading through audiobooks these days.
Right.
Many more. And so if you have an audiobook version, a lot of people don't want to sit down or don't have the time to, or whatever, to read a book using a paper book. So if you have an audiobook version that they could listen to on Spotify or Audible or wherever it might be, that's awesome. You've got a buyer there that you would not have had otherwise. Highly recommend. And I've definitely done that as well, made that arrangement for that to happen. So there'll be those three versions of the book.
Right. Audio, print, and ebook.
Exactly.
Right. That sounds awesome. I will make sure to put all of the links and mention the resources that you've mentioned in the description below. If people want to work with you or to find out more about you and your writings, where can they find you?
The best place to start is my general website, which is my name, WayneJones.ca. I'm in Canada.
You're in Canada, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any social media, or is that not something you do at all?
I really cut it down. I'm the only social media I'm on is Instagram, which I consider the safest of.
Oh, damn. There's a question here. Why is Instagram the safest?
Well, it's just that I had some experiences on Twitter where I was, those famous gang attacks where you say something that someone misinterprets, and then
that's a problem on Twitter, yes.
Then 50 people jump on you,
right?
And it's impossible to. And I had that happen once or twice for statements that, didn't deserve that treatment. Mm-hmm. And I got off. Once I got off Twitter, there's no way I'm going back. I'm also not going back to X. But on Instagram, you can find me at my Sam Johnson or at writing.editing. I have two accounts there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for sharing this. We are coming to the end of this episode. Do you have any last comments or recommendation for the people who are listening?
I would say, I mean, just to get back to the writers, I hate to hear about someone who wants to write a book, and especially someone who might have an idea and is holding themselves back because they think it's impossible or they think it's too much work. Because I know the pleasure that comes from creating a written product that you're happy with. That is a very much a joyful thing, and not necessarily because you're going to make $1 million, but because you've really achieved something. The English language, when I write in, c'est la même chose pour le français aussi, mais is a monster to tackle. And if you can manage to get readable sentences out of that read well, you deservedly should be proud of that.
I can totally relate to that. So yeah, if you have a book in mind, don't wait, sit down today, write 300 words, the same thing tomorrow, and every day until you have your 600,000 after a year or so, less than a year, and then you'll be proud of you.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Then the real work begins.
Yes, but don't tell them about that. That's it. Let them have their first draft, and then they can contact you and see how much work is still left. Okay. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for joining me today. That was an awesome episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode until the end. Please leave a review or a comment, as this will help others find the podcast and will help us get more amazing guests like Wayne. I'm Angel Pretot, the French coach. See you next time.